Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Gerald McCormick. Gerald is a former member of the Tennessee General Assembly from Chattanooga. During his time in the General Assembly, Gerald rose to the leadership positions of Majority Leader and Chair of the Budget Subcommittee of House Finance, Ways and Means. Gerald, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before I ask you about your Elvis infatuation, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
I'm actually drinking coffee right now.
How you take it?
Just black.
You're a good man.
Yeah, it's just simple.
Fuels your day, huh?
That's right. Sure does.
You're a caffeine or non-caffeine guy?
Caffeine. Have to get up and get going.
Yeah, you're a better man than me. So as I was telling my producer, Madison, and as you alluded to, you and I have known each other a long time. We both grew up in West Tennessee in the Memphis, Germantown area. And I was thinking about this earlier, Gerald. We probably met when, we were 12?
Yeah, it was like 1973.
Yeah, I guess we were 11, yeah.
Yeah. Went to St. Louis to watch some baseball, and the bus broke down on the way back home.
Yep.
And I think my dad picked us up at the side of the road and took us home.
I think so. And if I remember that trip, I think it was my little brother's baseball team, and they approached us as 11 and 12-year-olds to be chaperones for the 8-year-olds.
Yeah, big mistake.
Yeah. But we went up to see the Cardinals play because Tim McCarver was playing for the Cardinals at that time. And it was during the 1973 energy crisis. And driving home at night on the, I think it was the Germantown Baptist Church bus, which was an old
that's
school
what I remember
bus.
too. Yeah.
And it broke down either in the Missouri boot heel or just into Arkansas, and nothing was open. And the parents had to drive from Germantown to come rescue us. That was an adventure.
That was, but it was fun to see Tim McCarver and some of the other players, and it was a memory that lives on.
Yeah, absolutely. And even though we met at that young age, we went to different schools, knew of each other, and we're always friendly with each other and had good acquaintance, but we never really got a chance to really develop a friendship, I guess, until maybe high school and when you were at Germantown. And I think your sister knew my sister, and we're good friends. And I was over at Christian Brothers, and then we both ended up at UT together.
Yeah, that's right. And then I remember when you came to Chattanooga to run a TV station, and I saw your picture in the paper, and you look just like you did when you were 11 years old.
Oh, it's that baby face, Gerald.
That's right. That's right.
My mother blessed me with that. You know, I think you were one of the first people to reach out to me when I got to Chattanooga to welcome me to town and see what you could do for me. And I've always been greatly appreciative of that. I do need to ask you a question back in your Memphis days. It's almost common that you got to be an Elvis fan if you live in Memphis. But what was your infatuation with Elvis?
Oh yeah, Elvis. Of course, every kid in Memphis wanted to, see Elvis or be Elvis or whatever, because he was from the area, and we used to go and hang out at the gate and see if he'd come out. And I remember he had an uncle named Bester Presley, and he would open the gate and let me play in the front yard at Elvis's. Oh yeah, he was very friendly. And then when I was 12, my first concert was Elvis, and got to see him.
That's
and
pretty cool.
That was exciting. He had a lot of charisma.
So did you ever get to meet him hanging out in his front yard?
I did not. No, never did. But the legend lives on. So being from Memphis, and when he died and everything, it was a big deal.
Where were you when he died?
I was at home, and I remember my parents were in Florida, and when they came back, of course, we ran out in the yard, and told them we'd heard Elvis had died, and it had been on the radio.
Yep.
And they knew about it. But yeah, it was like someone you knew, but you didn't really know him.
Well, the interesting thing about that is you can ask a Memphis person who grew up at that time where they were, and everyone will always be able to tell you exactly where they were. My mother was driving me to football practice at Christian Brothers. And as you know, whenever Elvis went in the hospital or had some kind of medical issue, it was always reported on the news.
Sure
Elvis was taken by ambulance to Baptist Memorial Hospital. So on the way to football practice, they made that announcement. By the time I got to football practice, he was dead. And one of the guys on the team was a guy named Brent West. Well, Brent's dad was a guy named Red West. And Red was one of his bodyguards who ended up being an actor in Baba Black Sheep and a few other things. But so, we kind of had that connection there. That was a weird day. And then the week that followed, which is now affectionately referred to as Death Week in Memphis, when the world just descended upon it in that funeral, was unbelievable.
Yeah, I remember.
So you went to Germantown, and what I found interesting in doing a little of the background on you, even though I know a lot of the background of you, you had at that time, which was what I would consider one of the ultimate high school jobs, working in a service station. That doesn't happen anymore.
Oh yeah, and we fixed tires, changed oil, did full service. We'd go out and pump gas.
Yep.
You had a self-service island and a full service, and we'd clean the windshield, just like the old-fashioned days. And it was right in the middle of Germantown, so we got to see everybody that would come in and out. And it was really a good experience. It's still a Gulf station there, but now it's a little convenience store.
Yeah, the convenience store aspect and the self-service really took away from having attendants there that, as you said, you saw everyone in town.
Yeah. It was really a good job.
How long did you do that?
Probably for a couple of years.
What were some of the lessons for you that came from that? Was it the work ethic? Was it customer service? Or was it just a high school job?
Well, you had to learn to deal with people and solve problems. And that's your entire life. That's what you're going to do. And that was a good training. Somebody be mad because the car wash had scratched their car, or, gas was too expensive. And we had the pumps set up. They were old-fashioned pumps, and gas had gone over $1 a gallon, but the pumps would not go over $1 a gallon. So you might have the pump set at 55 cents, but that really meant you had bought $1.10 worth of gas because you didn't have digital then. So you'd have to explain to people. And then somebody would fill up and say, well, here's about $20. You'd have to say, well, it's really $40. You'd have to explain it to them and deal with people's problems. And that's good for teenagers, to learn how to do that and to keep up with the money. I remember coming up short one time and I was horrified. You just had to be careful. You have responsibilities, and that was very important.
If I look back at those days, when you talk about the responsibility and coming up short, they put a lot of trust in someone your age to, basically run a business at that time.
Yeah, I didn't realize it so much at the time, but they really did. And it was good. It was fun. We were proud of our job.
Yeah.
And proud that we were working and tried to do a good job. And I'm glad I got to do that. It was really fun.
So we kind of reconnected at UT. What got you to UT? Was it had the major you wanted, or was it kind of like me? It was like my dad told me I could go anywhere I wanted as long as it was in-state tuition, so I chose somewhere 400 miles away.
Yeah. That was me. Wanted to go to UT. I went to a football game in like 1969. Memphis State and UT played in Memphis, and I went to that game and fell in love with the orange jerseys.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it was in state, And my mother really wanted me to go to UT. And I went for 1 quarter. We had quarters back then.
Yep.
And I wanted to go home to Memphis State. I was homesick. And she wouldn't let me. So she made me go back and finish in Knoxville. And I ended up loving it. And eventually graduated and had a ball, had too much fun really when I was there. But it ended up well. Graduated in political science, which is fairly useless as a degree, but it was a lot of fun being there, and look back on those days, which they can last forever. But of course, you eventually have to graduate, go out into the world.
They do force that, don't they? Very, very similar, and I want to talk about this a little bit. And I think a lot of Memphis kids, when they travel across the state, kind of experience this because, much like you, my first quarter there, I'm like, I got to get out of this place. I mean, Memphis is nice and flat, and we got all these hills in Knoxville, and I'm not walking up to the hill at 7 a.m. to take a biology lab. Are you nuts? And,
yeah.
I kind of did the similar thing. I called home, and I said, hey, guess what? I'm going to come home next quarter. And my dad said, well, you can do that, but you're going to live in a dorm. You're not going to have a car, and you're just going to focus on school. And I said, well, I could do that here. He said, exactly.
Yeah, I had a stick shift car too, which going from flat Memphis to the hills in Knoxville, I had to learn to drive again because they roll backward every time you got on a hill.
Yeah.
But fell in love with Knoxville in East Tennessee, and I really enjoyed my time there.
Well, and you were pretty active on campus too, weren't you? I know you're a political science major, but I know you were active in the fraternity and other things around the school.
Yeah, I was actually president of the Young Democrats at UT, which is funny because I later got elected to the legislature as a Republican. But so I was politically active somewhat, and then did the fraternity thing, which was a lot of fun. And I think we were right down the street from where you were.
Yeah, I was around the corner as an ATO for a while. Talk about the being active with the Young Democrats. And I know you're a political science major, but why is something like that important for someone who may be in college? And what did that do for you?
It sort of forced us to, look at the issues and the candidates and to just get involved. It's important for people, I believe, to get involved. If you don't get active in that kind of thing, the people that do are going to do something bad to you at some point, and you need to be active in contact with your elected people, especially. And you got to keep in mind, elected people work for you. You don't need to be intimidated by them, and they're your employee, and you need to be respectful, but let them know where you stand, and that's what representative government's all about. And I learned that, and I remember working on a campaign for a guy named Bill Nolan, who was running for state representative. He was the state representative, and he actually lost his race to a guy named Jimmy Hudson, who's now in Chattanooga. Yeah. But I remember that, and it was just good to connect those people. And I still know Bill Nolan. He's a lobbyist in Nashville now, and also know Jimmy Hudson. So, you make relationships that really can last a lifetime.
You've spent a lot of your career in politics. Did you go into UT knowing you wanted to be a political science major?
Not really. It was just, I was interested in two things. One was history and the other was politics. And so I just kind of floated into it. There was no big plan. My sister was the first one to really go to college. And I didn't know, I didn't know how to go to college. So I just kind of fell into it and thought these are classes that will be easier for me. And so I went in that route, and I just went from there, figured it out along the way.
So one of the things, and I want to go back a little bit, you mentioned working in your dad's business. So your sister was the first to go to college. What was your dad's business that was the family business?
He did, it was called Pumps and Piping, and they sold pumps, piping, concrete meter boxes for water meters, just anything that had to do with water flowing or sewage plants. And so I would load trucks and make deliveries, and we'd go anywhere from Texas, over into Middle Tennessee and up into Missouri, Boot Hill, and down into Mississippi, and make deliveries of those items.
That's a big coverage area.
Yeah. And I was a teenager making these trips, which, again, that's a lot of responsibility for a kid, but learned a lot. And learned how to deal with people, on construction sites and municipal water plants and stuff like that. So, again, learning how to deal with people and with problems is what young people need to get experience at, because it continues and comes back again and again.
And that really gave you great training for your political life, being a problem solver.
Yeah, it really did. And not be offended when somebody is angry or insistent on their views. And you have to deflect a little bit, try to understand while holding your ground. And it was a good training ground for it.
Yeah. At UT as political science major, did they recommend you get involved with something like Young Democrats, or was that just something you sought out?
That's a good question. I had a couple of political science professors who suggested I get involved, but I naturally kind of gravitated toward that. But yeah, we had some good political science professors there that encouraged that.
Is there one that sticks out to you that you look back as either as a mentor or someone who had a big influence on you?
There's a guy named Dr. Douglas Carlisle, who was there, and also a guy named T-Mac Simpson, who was there. Both of those guys really encouraged me. Dr. Carlisle had actually worked in the Kennedy administration, and Dr. Simpson had worked for Jimmy Carter.
Oh, wow.
And and they were interesting guys and encouraged, sort of led me in that direction. And were good mentors.
So you graduate with your political science degree. What do you do with it?
That's a good question.
That's a question all dads ask.
You go get a real estate license, or try to find a job in government, or whatever, or go to law school, which I didn't have good enough grades to go to law school because I had too much fun as an undergrad. So
that's how we knew each other.
yeah, no doubt. But that's it. If I was able to go back, I would probably get a business degree, and just for practical reasons.
So you got out and did what?
Well, moved to Chattanooga. My wife was from Chattanooga, so we moved there.
And your wife, just if you would just explain who your wife is.
Yeah, she is Dr. Kimberly McCormick, and she is the Vice Chancellor for External Affairs for the Tennessee Board of Regents, which is the entity that runs all the community colleges in the state. So she does that. She was the school teacher, though, when we first got married, was at Ooltewah High School for many years. And I was the football announcer there.
I didn't know
that. For about 10 years. Loved it.
That's fun, isn't it?
With kids. Oh, it was great. It was great. We're part of the community. Our oldest daughter, Cooper, went to school there, and we still have friends, from there. Did that. But my career path was really, I bounced around a lot because nobody was beating the door down to hire a political science major. But I eventually landed with the Billboard company, which is now Reagan Outdoor. It was something else then, but did real estate work for them and built billboards, which I loved. It was a fun job and good people. And that's really how I got my start. And then I eventually opened up commercial real estate brokerage. We did some development and in brokerage, and really have enjoyed the real estate business. After I got out of the legislature, I became a lobbyist because I tell people that was the only thing I was qualified to do at that point.
Well, back to getting out and getting with the billboard company. Did that also feed your political side? Because my understanding that is kind of unsaid is a billboard company's got to be very active in local politics to get approval on a lot of their facings. Is that not correct?
Yeah, that is true. It's heavily regulated, and you have state and local permits you have to get, and you also have to follow the federal guidelines. And so it is political, especially at the local level. And at state level, we would have to go up and visit to make sure nothing bad happened, because a lot of people don't like billboards.
Yeah.
And so we had that struggle from time to time. But so I did get connected politically through the billboard business, which later worked out to my advantage.
Well, and did that to a degree scratch that itch for you? You know, your political science major, you always like politics. So here you start your career and you're doing commercial real estate for the billboard company, but there's a huge political component to it too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I met a lot of people that later I was able to go back to, and they were very helpful. And that was part of I was lucky to get that position, and always thankful to a fellow named Scott LaFoy
I know
for
Scott,
hiring me. Yeah. He's a good guy, and he's
sure
running another billboard business right now. But he hired me and trained me, and he was tough, and but he knew what he was doing. So it was a lot of fun.
Well, and I think one of the interesting things you pointed out a couple times now is you've met a lot of people early on in your career that you're still connected to that have helped you through your career, that I think when you look at someone graduating college or in their first 10 years of their career, you undervalue the fact of those connections you make, but they really do help you out, a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades later.
Yeah, and I would suggest if any young people are listening that you do find mentors. My father died when I was young, and so I always would look for older, usually men, to kind of get advice from. One was Bill Bennett in Chattanooga, who was the assessor of property, and he gave me a lot of good guidance. And people like that, that have a lot of knowledge, tend to want to share it with someone young, and that's a good way to learn and to connect. And that's what I did, and it worked out well. It really did. And you meet a lot of good people like that.
That's an important point. How old were you when your dad passed?
I was 20.
Yeah, that is young. I mean, that's formative years.
Yeah, it was a crushing blow, as people who've lost a parent know, but forced me to think for myself a little bit, and just work hard, and good things will happen if you work hard.
Yeah, very true. Now, at what point did you decide to enlist in the National Guard? And because I want to go down that path a little bit.
Yeah, I was at UT, and there were two things. One, my father was a Korea veteran. My grandfather, his father, was a World War II veteran, and I had several great uncles that were World War II veterans, and were actually at Pearl Harbor. And so I felt an obligation from that standpoint to kind of carry that on. And so what I did is I went to the recruiter, signed up, and I was a student at the time, and I ended up taking off a whole year to do Army training because you have to go through the, same process. I remember went through basic training, which was brutal. It's funny now, but it wasn't funny then. And
where'd you do basic?
Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and had some tough drill sergeants that were amazing people, though. And then went to advanced individual training. And I remember when I got there, and that was at Fort McClellan, Alabama. They told me when we got there that our training had been extended because they had added some things to it. And I told them, I can't do that. I've got to be back for spring quarter to finish school. They just got a big laugh out of that. And
I've got other plans. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Excuse me. And they tell you what to do in the Army. They don't discuss it with you. But anyway, so I was late to get back, and I ended up graduating after I got back from my Army thing. But
do you remember the year?
That would have been the fall of '86 and early 1987.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back to school in the fall of '87 and graduated. I did that. I had gotten married in the meantime, and Kim, basically, I was ready to just go to work like a bum, and she forced me to go back to school and get my degree. So I did that. I tell people I went to school for 7 years as an undergraduate, and lots of people do that, but generally they're called doctors if they do that. So not in my case, but I did go back and finish eventually.
One thing I find interesting about your decision to join the National Guard and eventually you're deployed, and I want to talk about that, is we grew up and graduated high school in 1980. And if you look back on the military in 1980, not a lot of young men were choosing to join. We were coming out of the Vietnam War era. We were coming out of the Iranian hostage crisis and the failed rescue attempt. And there just wasn't a lot of focus on serving your country at that time. And so I find your decision, I understand the family aspect of it, but to be very unselfish, because I look at someone like myself and frankly, it never crossed my mind to do that.
Yeah.
So was it the family draw or were there other factors in it for you?
Well, I'm a big history buff, love history, and I felt like that was a way to make my own little bit of history and have that in my background. And I kind of have a romanticized version of it going in, which my drill sergeants quickly drilled out of me. Those guys were tough. I cannot emphasize that enough. But I was glad to do it, and I was very patriotic, still am.
Yeah.
And I feel like we all need to do our bit. But, everybody can do it in different ways. You can be active in the community, or you can do the military, or there are just so many ways, nonprofits. But, it was kind of unpopular at the time. But when President Reagan came in, he really reemphasized the military, and they reformed it. And I think it became a little more popular. It's one of those things I wouldn't take $1 million, to take that experience away, but you couldn't pay me $1 million to go back to basic training.
No, but it was life forming, and you mentioned your drill sergeants a couple times. Was there a particular drill sergeant that had a huge effect on you?
Oh yeah, his name was Harris. I don't remember his first name, and
he probably didn't have one. You weren't allowed to call him anything except Sergeant Harris, huh?
It was drill sergeant.
Drill sergeant.
And
sir.
Yeah, and he got me off the bus, and he was a big black guy, and he was the meanest guy you've ever seen in your life. And he heard my Southern accent, and he made sure that he picked me up for special attention, and he was terrifying. But by the end of our time there, we would have followed him through a brick wall. I mean, he was a leader and just a perfect soldier, and we loved him by the end of it. I remember I finally got up the courage to say something to him as we were going to our graduation. Said, I really appreciate you. Never forget you. And he looked at me and said, Private, you don't realize how fast I'll be able to forget you after we get off this bus. And he was funny from that standpoint, but he taught us how to be leaders. And I wish I knew where he was now. But there were some great people.
And that's one of those circumstances where you don't know what you're going through when you're going through it. And you need that space of time to really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But it was a good experience. And, we still, my old Army buddies, we'll get around and tell stories and have fun. And we have some good ones from those days.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because you graduate college, you've got your business career started, you're married, you sign up for the Tennessee State National Guard. When did you get deployed, and what was that like? Because I'm thinking back to those days of, to a degree, the National Guard was where in the Vietnam War era, people went that didn't want to be drafted. They wanted to have something secure, and we didn't have any active wars at that time until Gulf War I. So you're in the Tennessee National Guard, and all of a sudden, Saddam Hussein invades Iraq or Kuwait, and boom! I mean, what's that like to find out you're being deployed and you weren't really expecting it?
Well, the Army and the military noticed. During Vietnam, people would join National Guard to avoid being deployed. So what they did is they integrated the units where you could not deploy without having National Guard or Reserve units. The unit I was with, there was no active Army unit that did it. So we were, when Saddam invaded Kuwait, we were immediately called up and went to Fort Campbell. And there were 2 units like mine, and we were like a headquarters operations unit. And we were in Saudi Arabia by September, which the invasion was August. Mm-hmm. We got there in September, and I remember the 2nd Infantry Division was the only real combat division there, and they were set up at the road leading into Saudi Arabia, because everybody assumed that Saddam would continue on. So we were there fast. And then, of course, we built it up until there were 500,000, soldiers there from all over the world. But yeah, we expected to get deployed because we knew that, that's the way it was set up by that time, and that's the way it should be. Mm-hmm. And again, it's one of those things I kind of hated being there, but I was proud to be there at the same time. My oldest daughter was born while I was there, but we had a great homecoming after it was all over. How
long were you there?
It was about 7 months, which seemed like 7 years, but it wasn't as long. The guys now they're doing these 1-year deployments. Mm-hmm. So, but 7 months, we went there, built everything up. The war, obviously went very quickly, and then we rounded up and came home.
Yeah, and just for some historical perspective of people who don't necessarily remember that, the invasion was in August, and then we spent 6 months of really, as your point, building it up, troops coming from all over the world, preparing for it. And the actual, I guess, lack of better description, in defense of invasion of Iraq, Gulf War I started, in January of 91, was it?
Yep, that's right. That's right. And didn't last long, thankfully. And our casualties were minimal. The Iraqis, of course, they had a lot of casualties, and that's, nothing to sneeze at, certainly or belittle. There were people, mm-hmm. A lot of people got killed. So, don't know what to do. Hopefully there'll be peace in the Middle East one day. I'm just not sure who can pull it off.
How did that experience affect you or change you from when you went in to when you came out?
it made me very thankful for my family, for our country. Just made me thankful. We're lucky. Americans make up about 4% of the world population. And as Warren Buffett says, if you're born in America, you've won the lottery already.
Exactly.
And then there's so many opportunities after that. But, you know, to have the kind of stable government we have is just such an advantage. And made me appreciate it. Now, Saudi Arabia, the people there were wonderful people. But it's different. You know, they would have execution on Friday night, and we were told to stay away, but it was a reality. And you know, but then again, you know, you go out in the morning, there'd be kids waiting at the bus stop to go to school, and beautiful people and nice people, and really enjoyed getting to know some of them. But I was thankful when I got home.
Yeah, different values.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your oldest daughter was born while you were deployed. Talk about your homecoming.
Yeah, well, luckily for me, before the war started, she was born in December of 1990. I was able, through the Red Cross, to come home for about a week and get to see her. So I did that and then went back over. And the war started, and then it was, I think, April before I got to come home. But it was really good. We came home and flew into Bangor, Maine, and about 3 a.m, we got to the airport there, and there were about 2,000 or 3,000 people cheering when we got off the plane at 3 a.m. So that was the first welcome home. Then we hopped on a plane to, I think, South Carolina, and then we bounced over to Nashville or Smyrna, which is where our unit was based, and got out there. And, of course, everybody was there waiting for us, and had a new baby there, and it was just, it was wonderful. I was so glad to be home and thankful for, you know, everything I had, and put it into perspective. That was it. It was just joy.
Yeah, I bet. And so you get home and you're ready to restart your life. When did you decide to run for office?
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually ran as a Democrat in 1992 for the legislature, and lost that race to Kenny Meyer, who's a good friend now. But he beat me. I tell him every time I see him, you're the only guy there to beat me in an election. But right after that, Zach Wamp and Corker and Ken Meyer and several other Republicans approached me and said, listen, you sound more like us than you do the other guys. And if you ever decided you wanted to be a Republican, we'd certainly welcome you. And so I switched parties and got active with the Republican Party. And Bobby Wood was my state representative, and he asked me to be his campaign chairman for a couple of cycles. And then after he decided to retire, he called me. And in the meantime, I had been vice chairman of the party and finance chairman, president of the Pachyderm Club. So I kind of had my bona fides in order.
Yeah.
And when Bobby decided not to run, he called. And I already knew, you know, all the key people in the precincts and everything. So I made my calls and had pretty good support. So ran from there and won in 2004. And I was reelected every 2 years through 2016 election, and then retired in 2018.
Well, and you rose pretty fast, Gerald, if you're majority leader by 2010, really only, 3 election cycles.
Yeah. And that was interesting. It was a time of great change in our state. The Democrats have run the state for 140 years. And Jimmy Naphy was the Speaker of the House.
I remember
he was from West Tennessee. a great friend now, and he was actually a mentor to me, even though he was a Democrat and I was a Republican. But the Republicans won the majority, and I was very active in helping other members win. And it just kind of all happened at the right time. And then, so in 2010, we had to elect a new majority leader, and I ran for it and won, and spent the next 6 years doing that. And that's when Haslam got elected governor. So the majority leader typically carries the legislative package for the governor. And so I worked a lot with Bill Haslam during those 6 years, and was lucky to get to do it, and enjoyed it, but also was very time-consuming and stressful.
Yeah.
So after 6 years, I decided to step aside and let somebody else do it.
Do you think it's changed so much now that you were able to work both sides of the aisle? You don't see that much anymore, do you?
There's still friendships across the aisle, but so many outside groups now. The Club for Growth and some school voucher proponents got involved this year and spent millions of dollars on state legislative races. I think the first time I ran, I spent about $40,000 to get elected in John Lundberg in Northeast Tennessee, the state senator. And they spent about $1 million to beat him.
Wow.
This year. So that's a big difference. It makes it harder to work across the aisle because you get accused of, being treasonous or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's more difficult. There are still a lot of friendships, but I think maybe it's harder now than it used to be, especially with social media. You can get attacked by anybody anywhere, and politicians like to avoid being attacked.
Yeah.
And
understandably so.
Yeah, it's tough, but there's still some good. I still have some really good friends from the other side of the aisle, and especially those, and they're good people. All over the map, all over the political spectrum, and there's still some people working together.
Yeah, and if anyone's going to dedicate their time to do something like that, you got to know at heart that they've got the best interests of their fellow citizens. At least you would think so. I do want to talk about where you are today. I know you're at the Ingram Group, but you've also had a serious health challenge. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's about 3.5 years ago, I noticed a funny feeling in my right leg, and eventually went to the doctor, and they told me I had a central nervous system issue. And the first ones that gave me that news, it looked like the doctors looked like they were about 18 years old, so I didn't really believe them. But they finally convinced me. I went to Vanderbilt up here, and one of the top neurosurgeons there told me that I had ALS, which is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, better known as Lou Gehrig's disease. And what it does is it breaks down your nervous system in a way that affects your muscles, and eventually they just don't work. And it's 100% fatal, 90% within 5 years. Mm. But the good news is that I know several people who have, had it for 10 or 15 years and are still in pretty good shape. So mine has been pretty slow moving.
That's good.
Started in my legs, and my legs. I've got a wheelchair now. My arms are weaker than they were, but I'm still able to, do things for myself. And I'm very fortunate, actually, that I can still take care of myself mostly.
And if you could talk a little bit about the reaction to that diagnosis. You're an active guy. You've served your country. You're active in the community. You served your state and your district, by being in elected office. And I know what you said here 18-year-old looking doctor telling you this, it's hard to believe. But when it finally sinks in, what's your reaction? I'm just trying to get an idea of the impact.
Well, obviously it's not good, but there have been some good things about it. When we first found out, Kim and I were with the doctor, and he said, "This is." Kim asked him flat out, "Is this ALS?" And he said, "Yes, it is." And so, there was a shock from it. But then after we kind of settled down, it's, I'm 62 years old. I'm not 32, and I've met some people who are in their 20s and 30s, and I think that's just absolutely, tragic.
Yeah.
I've lived a good life, and I still live a good life. I'm a grandfather, and I have 2 grown children who are very close to us, and I've got a family that's supportive, and I've been incredibly blessed and lucky my entire life. I mean, since I was a little kid. And so I don't have any complaints. And I know this sounds kind of silly, but it's really true when you think about it. Everybody's going to die from something, and this is the card I drew. So I don't have any, I'm not angry about it or anything like that. It's just it is what it is, and I'm going to enjoy life as long as I'm able to.
I don't think that's silly at all. I think that's a great attitude and pretty much reflects who you've been your whole life. Looking at each opportunity as a blessing and being able to look at a challenge like this and appreciate, everything that you've had accomplished and done in the past and have a positive vision for the future. I respect that.
Yeah, it's good. And I do have to give a shout out to the VA. The veterans are twice likely to get the civilian population.
I didn't know
and,
that.
And the VA makes the presumption that it is related to my military service. So they have stepped up big time to make sure it's not, a terrible thing as far as financials. They pay me. I'm 100% disabled, even though I still work, and they provided me with this wheelchair. Looks like you could strap missiles to it. I mean, it's a high-tech wheelchair. They came out, redid my bathroom to make it more accessible, did some construction work, built a deck in our backyard that I could go up and down, be outside, and still escape if the house caught on fire or something. I mean, they have really gone above and beyond.
That's refreshing to hear.
Yeah. And the people at Murfreesboro and Nashville that I go to are just some of the best people you've ever seen. So, again, I'm lucky from that standpoint. And people that don't have that, it would be financially devastating to get a disease like this and not be able to work. Yeah. And not only that, but your family has to pitch in, and they work too.
Oh yeah.
But the VA sends a person every day, 5 days a week, to help me. Just be here to if I need food or help doing anything, they'll be here for me. So it's again, it could be a whole lot worse.
Yeah, and again, your attitude is refreshing and reflective and appreciating all the things that you've got. And I think it's important for people to hear that. Everything can be a challenge, regardless of what the situation is, but the right attitude sure helps get through those quite a bit. And I got to tell you, Gerald, having known you all these years and knowing what you're going through, I greatly appreciate you and everything you've done.
Well, thank you. And, one other thing is we all have plans. When I got out of the legislature a few years ago, my plan for my 60s was to work and build up some wealth for my family and that kind of thing. And but we find out that somebody else has plans, and their plan is better than the one you came up with.
Yeah.
And you've got to accept that and roll with it. And I'm just so lucky in my life. I have no complaints.
Well, and you bring up making plans, and I'll refer you to one of my favorite John Lennon quotes. Life is what happens when you're off making other plans. We can plan everything we want, but life is always going to dictate what we do. And one of the things I really wanted to get you on this podcast for a long time, and I'm glad we've been able to do this. And I know you've got a pretty hard out in terms of time, so I do want to get to one last question if you got time for one more.
Sure.
And before I get to that question, I got to thank the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring my Morning Cup. They've been very supportive of this, and I'm really proud to be associated with TVA. And you can follow TVA on social media, and to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and you can visit TVA.com/do good here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. Last question, Gerald, and I look forward to your answer on this. What would you tell that 25-year-old Gerald McCormick is important for a happy life, particularly with everything that you've done and gone through and been able to be reflective at this point?
I would say, and I tell new members of the legislature this, the most important thing is to stay close to your family. And even if you get caught up in these dramatic events or what seem like dramatic events and career decisions and whatever you're doing, stay with your family, because in the end, they're the ones that are going to be loyal to you. They're going to take care of you, or you might need to take care of them. But when all the glory is over, and whether it's a political career or business career, if you're sitting there by yourself, it's a pretty empty thing. So that's what I would say. Always prioritize your family, like the Costas do. Stay close to them, and you'll do okay.
Well, that's great advice. And I know Kim and your daughters have been a pillar of strength for you, and just a strong family and having that relationship. You're absolutely right. At the end of the day, all the accolades, everyone else cheering you on, they go away.
That's right.
This has been a great conversation, Gerald. I'm so glad we've been able to do this. And I can't tell you in proper words the way I admire you.
Well, thank you, Mike. And it's good to reconnect with you, and love you.
All right. Love you too, brother. Thank you for doing this.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.